So thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Genser, and I'm an international human rights lawyer. With me today are my clients, Victoria Cárdenas, the wife of Juan Sebastián Chamorro, and Berta Valle, the wife of Félix Maradiaga. In addition, we're joined by Julio Sandino, the son of Violeta Granera. Let me first explain how this press briefing is going to work. First, we're going to hear from Vicky and then Berta, who will deliver their remarks in both Spanish and English. Julio is in a car right now, and with spotty internet service, although he won't speak initially, he'll be available to answer questions. After they've spoken, I'll add some brief remarks, and then we will open up the floor for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, you can either put a question in the chat box or indicate you'd like to be called on to ask a question, and we'll take questions in the order that they are given. I would ask as well that in the chat box you identify your name and the organization that you are from. And so with that, why don't we begin? Victoria.
Thank you, Jared. A un mes del secuestro siguen desaparecidos. En una clara violación a sus derechos fundamentales, la Policía Nacional sigue sin brindar información sobre el paradero de los precandidatos presidenciales Juan Sebastián Chamorro y Félix Maradiaga, y de la dirigente de la Unidad Nacional Azul y Blanco, Violeta Granera. Esto, además de impedirle su derecho a reunirse con sus familiares, los mantiene en total indefensión, ya que sus abogados tampoco han podido conversar con ellos. Además, en una muestra de incumplimiento a sus compromisos internacionales, el Estado de Nicaragua ignoró la orden de liberar inmediatamente a Chamorro, Maradiaga y Granera, emitida el pasado 24 de junio por la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, tribunal regional que les otorgó medidas provisionales por considerar que enfrentan una situación de extrema gravedad. Se anticipa que el Estado de Nicaragua tampoco cumplirá con el requerimiento de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, que estableció como plazo máximo el 8 de julio para informar sobre las medidas adoptadas para proteger eficazmente la vida de Chamorro, Maradiaga, Granera y la de sus núcleos familiares. Los tres opositores fueron secuestrados el 8 de junio por agentes de la Policía Nacional y a través de un comunicado, la institución confirmó que los tenía detenidos. Mediante otro comunicado, se conoció que en audiencias secretas en las que no se les respetó su derecho a ser acompañados por sus abogados, un juez les amplió a 90 días el periodo de detención para ser investigados. A la fecha, esta nueva escalada represiva incluye el secuestro de 26 opositores, entre dirigentes políticos, sociales, empresariales, estudiantiles y campesinos, a quienes se les pretende acusar del delito de traición a la patria, contemplado en la recién aprobada Ley 1055. Este nuevo grupo se sumó a los más de 120 presos políticos que ya permanecían en las cárceles. In clear violation of their fundamental rights, the National Police continues to withhold information on the whereabouts of the presidential candidates Juan Sebastián Chamorro and Félix Maradiaga, and the leader of the Blue and White National Unit, Violeta Granera. This, in addition to preventing the right to reunite with their relatives, keeps them totally defenseless, since their lawyers have not been able to meet with them. Furthermore, demonstrating its incompliance with its international commitment, the state of Nicaragua ignored the order to immediately release Chamorro, Maradiaga, and Granera, issued on June 24th by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the regional court that granted them provisional measures considering that they face an extremely serious situation. It is also expected that the state of Nicaragua will not comply with the request of the International Court, which established July 8th as a maximum deadline to report on the measures adopted to effectively protect the lives of Chamorro, Maradiaga, Granera, and that of their families. The three opposition leaders were kidnapped on June 8th by agents of the National Police, which confirmed in a statement they have been detained. Through another statement, it was learned that in secret hearings where their respective lawyers were not present, a judge extended the period of detention to 90 days to allow for investigations. To date, this escalation of repression includes the kidnapping of 26 opponents, including political, social, business, student, and peasant leaders, who are being accused of the crime of treason with respect to the recently approved law 1055. This new group of political prisoners joins the more than 120 who were already in the country's jails. Berta.
Berta no se oye.
Gracias. Buenos días a todos. A partir de las capturas de Chamorro, Maradiaga y Granera, se han cometido al menos 10 violaciones al derecho internacional, ya que fueron detenidos y sus viviendas allanadas sin orden judicial y permanecen bajo custodia en lugares desconocidos, donde se les niega el derecho a ser visitados por sus familiares y a estar en contacto con un abogado que los defienda. Por ello, sus familiares consideran que fueron secuestrados y están desaparecidos. Además, están expuestos a jueces afines al régimen que no respetan el debido proceso. Y Daniel Ortega y la vicepresidenta Rosario Murillo se han referido a ellos como terroristas y criminales, lo que constituye una injerencia ilegal a sus casos porque ejerce presión sobre el Poder Judicial para condenarlos. Y al no existir base legal para su detención y estar desaparecidos extralegalmente, están expuestos a tratos crueles, degradantes e inhumanos que bajo el marco del derecho internacional, al persistir en el tiempo, se constituyen en una forma de tortura. En medio del silencio policial, rigurosamente los familiares de Chamorro, Maradiaga y Granera siguen llegando 3 veces por día a las instalaciones de la Dirección de Auxilio Judicial. Ahí entregan alimentos, artículos de aseo y medicinas, pero solo en algunas ocasiones les reciben algunas cosas, especialmente agua. También siguen agotando a nivel local los recursos legales para obtener una prueba de vida de sus seres queridos y hacer valer su derecho a la defensa, y confían en que la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos continúe con el proceso para lograr su pronta liberación. Since the capture of Chamorro, Maradiaga, and Granera, at least 10 violations of international law has been committed. They were arrested and their homes raided without a court order, and they remained in custody in unknown places where they are denied their right to be visited by their relatives and to be in contact with their chosen lawyers. For this reason, their relatives consider them to be kidnapped and disappeared. In addition, they are being brought before judges related to the regime who do not respect due process. Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo has referred to them as terrorists and criminals, which constitute illegal interference in their cases because it exerts pressure on the judicial branch to convict them. Since there is no legal basis for their detention and they are extra-legally disappear, they are being exposed to cruel, degrading, and inhuman treatment, which under the framework of international law constitutes a form of torture and longer it persists. Despite the silence by the police, I'm sorry.
It's okay, Berta, take your time.
This is so hard. Despite the silence by the police, the relative of Chamorro, Maradiaga, and Granera continue to arrive 3 times a day to facilitate the auxiliary judicial complex. They deliver food, toiletries, and medicine, but only on some occasions do the prison guards accept them things, especially water. Also, they continue to exhaust the legal resources available at the local level to obtain proof of life from their loved ones and assert their right to defense. They trust that the Inter-American Court will continue with the process to achieve their prompt release. Thank you.
Thank you, Berta, and thank you, Vicky. And I think that it's impossible for any of us to really understand.
Jared, you're on mute.
My apologies. You know, I think that it's obviously quite clear from Berta how difficult this is. And I would say that for Berta, Vicky, and Julio, one can really not even begin to imagine what it is like to have your loved ones be the subject of an institutional abduction. There really is no other way to describe it, entirely outside of the rule of law. And to now, for more than a month, have no contact with them through their lawyer or through their family on the ground. This is why, you know, not just for the prisoners themselves, but also for the families, this constitutes torture as a matter of international law. This is not normal. This is not acceptable. And the treatment of people in this manner must be unequivocally condemned and repudiated by the international community. And there are more than 30 people of the more than 140 political prisoners in Nicaragua who have been subjected to these institutional abductions and disappearances. And it is urgent in these circumstances because people who are abducted rather than merely detained are obviously incapable of defending themselves, incapable of being able to challenge their detention in a court of law and with access to counsel, and are at grave risk of physical and psychological torture beyond the psychological torture that they're suffering from having been, in fact, disappeared. Over my 20-year career as a human rights lawyer, I've seen firsthand how dictators manipulate legal systems to threaten, intimidate, harass, and arbitrarily detain their real or imagined opponents with grave implications for their human rights. And you know, I would say that what we see going on in Nicaragua today, contrary to Daniel Ortega's claims, do not demonstrate any strength or courage on his part, but rather profound weakness and fear. The reality is that that any of the imprisoned presidential candidates would beat Ortega in a presidential election if they were allowed to run, and his disappearance of them has only one intention, which is to prevent them from registering as presidential candidates by the August 2nd deadline to participate in the primary process. And courageous activists like Violeta Granera and so many others are also victims of these abductions and disappearances and arbitrary detentions because they speak the truth about what is happening in Nicaragua today. And to speak the truth in Nicaragua today is not only a crime of grave consequence, but also, I would say, something that Ortega can't, he can't allow to happen, because anyone who would hear people like Félix and Juan and Violeta speak would know that they're telling the truth. So let me conclude there for now. We're more than happy to answer questions that you might have for Vicky, for Berta, and for Julio. it is worth just lastly emphasizing that we have passed a terrible marker in the situations of these courageous imprisoned human rights defenders and political leaders, because Nicaragua is in fact a party to the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, the American Convention on Human Rights, and have a legal obligation as a matter of binding treaty law to abide by decisions of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which in its precautionary measures unequivocally demanded the immediate and unconditional release of these three courageous people. Historically, Nicaragua has always complied with its obligations under the treaty when ordered to do so by the court. And this marks a turning point and a terrible turning point in the evolution of the situation on the ground, because now, in flagrant violation of international law, Daniel Ortega has said to the Inter-American system and to the court that he will, with total impunity, ignore its judgments. So we'll now open the floor for questions. If you have a question, if you can put it into the chat box, or if you can just indicate you'd like to be recognized, and if you can also identify yourself as well, that would be greatly appreciated.
Just to translate the instructions for the Q&A into Spanish. Buenos días a todos, me llamo Michael Russo y soy colega de Jared Genser. Ahora las panelistas van a responder a preguntas de los periodistas quienes son participantes de hoy. Si tienen una pregunta, por favor, ponga su pregunta en el chat. También antes de su pregunta, por favor, identifíquense por su nombre y su afiliación. Con gusto puedo traducir preguntas y respuestas entre inglés y español si sería conveniente. Muchas gracias.
So I see a hand, that works too. Carlos Larios, you can also first identify yourself.
Aló, buenos días, ¿me escuchan?
Sí.
Buen día, mucho gusto a todos los presentes. Carlos Larios, periodista del diario La Prensa. Me gustaría preguntarle al abogado si el Estado de Nicaragua, al no cumplir con la resolución de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, comete un delito, y al cometerlo, si es así, ¿cuáles son las consecuencias que acarrearía para el Estado de Nicaragua al no cumplir con esa resolución de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos?
Muchas gracias, señor Larios. Jared, this is Carlos Larios from La Prensa. His question is for you. He's asking if Nicaragua does not comply with the measures that were granted by the Inter-American Court in the provisional measures. What will the consequences be for that in compliance?
Well, thank you for the question, and it is an important one. Unfortunately, there are not easy ways to compel Nicaragua to comply with the judgment of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. Nicaragua was supposed to respond by yesterday to the order of the court. In fact, should have complied by yesterday. And we know, of course, that all three of these courageous men and women, have remained detained, and so therefore the order has not been complied with. They may have provided some kind of a written response. It wouldn't have necessarily yet been conveyed to our international legal team, but obviously we'll see what they have to say, if they've said anything at all. In terms of how to enforce a judgment of the Inter-American Court, Article 69 of the Rules of Procedure of the court talk about the procedure for monitoring compliance with judgments. And in essence, the way that that is supposed to work is that both the state and the representatives of the victims are supposed to communicate reporting to the court itself. And the courts can require from other sources of information and from relevant data regarding compliance, and can even ask for expert opinions. Also, when it decides it's appropriate, it can convene the state and the victims' representatives in a hearing in order to monitor compliance with its decisions, and then Also, at that point, they would hear from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights about the case as well. And from there, then it can determine the state of compliance with its decision and issue relevant further orders. So what I would say is that we obviously need to wait a little bit of time to see if there was any actual response that will be conveyed to us from the court that might have been received by yesterday from the government of Nicaragua. It's already clear they haven't complied, though, even if we haven't seen what they might say in writing. And I would expect that our international lawyers that are representing Félix and Juan and Violeta before the Inter-American Court will make a motion for the court to convene exactly such a hearing to try to compel Nicaragua to come and then to have a further hearing and further orders made upon the end of that kind of a hearing. And we'll look to do that as rapidly as we can. Michael, do you want to translate that?
Yes, thank you, Jared. Señor Larios, desafortunadamente, si Nicaragua no cumpla con las medidas provisionales de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, no hay muchas maneras para exigir que Nicaragua cumpla. El Estado de Nicaragua de ayer, debido a cumplir con las medidas provisionales ayer, pero sabemos obviamente que los 4 nombrados siguen detenidos y por eso no han cumplido con las medidas provisionales. Es posible que proporcionarían una respuesta escrita a la Corte, pero todavía no sabemos. Por ejemplo, artículo 69 de las reglas de la Corte dice que el Estado y también los representantes de las víctimas pueden proporcionar información relevante a la Corte sobre sus medidas provisionales y también puede llevarse a cabo una audiencia para monitorear la información relevante. También se puede proporcionar información a la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos para determinar los hechos y para también ofrecer conclusiones. Ahorita tenemos que esperar un par de días para ver si Nicaragua proporcionó una respuesta oficial a la Corte, pero es claro en este momento que no han cumplido con los medios provisionales porque siguen detenidos. Y también anticipamos que los abogados de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos harán procedimientos en lo adelante lo antes posible. Muchas gracias.
So
the next question I can read is in Spanish.
Yeah, sure.
From Luis Felipe Palacios, correspondent from EFE, the EFE agency in Nicaragua. Are we classifying this as a forced disappearance and why? And have we requested that the International Red Cross verify the condition of those opposition leaders that are detained? En español, por favor. Estamos en presencia de desapariciones forzadas y por qué han solicitado al Comité de la Cruz Roja Internacional constate y verifique las condiciones de los opositores detenidos. Pregunta de Luis Felipe Palacios, corresponsal de la agencia EFE en Nicaragua.
Well, thank you for the question. Yes, we are in the presence of enforced disappearances, and let me just provide a definition for you. Just give me 1 second here. So, an enforced disappearance is when a person has been arrested, abducted, or taken by the state, and or with their authorization otherwise, followed by a refusal to acknowledge the deprivation of freedom, and or to give information about the fate and whereabouts of the persons involved, and where in such situations there is no means or method for the families to be able to have their counsel or family access them, and this what has happened to all 3 of these courageous people undoubtedly constitutes an enforced disappearance under international law. There's obviously a long history in the region of past dictatorships having engaged in enforced disappearances, which in many cases have ultimately led to the murders of people who were disappeared. And this is why this is so incredibly serious as a matter of international law, what is happening to these now more than 30 people, including Juan, Félix, and Violeta, because they are now being held outside of the rule of law. The government has claimed that they have been presented before a judge and ordered for 90 days of detention pending an investigation. The problem with this assertion is, number one, there's no way to confirm, in fact, that this actually happened. Number two, we don't even know if these three people were even present at the hearing that allegedly took place. We do know that none of their lawyers were informed about the hearing and they had no access to counsel. And the new law that allows for a 90-day detention period for an investigation and an incommunicado detention is illegal as a matter of international law. The law itself is illegal as a matter of international law because Nicaragua is a party to both the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the American Convention on Human Rights, which protect rights of due process. And you have a right under international law to the presumption of innocence, not to the presumption of guilt. And it's important to recall that neither Violeta nor Juan nor Félix have been charged with any crimes. They're merely being held arbitrarily and having been disappeared on the assertion that they may have committed crimes, but practically they've been sentenced to 90 days in jail. And I think that when you combine those flagrant violations of the presumption of innocence with the public comments of government officials in Nicaragua that they're terrorists and that they'll be found guilty, this is in flagrant violation of Nicaragua's obligations under international law. We have been in touch with the Red Cross. I can't say anything more than that, except what I've just said, because the process that they engage in is confidential, and they've asked that any information that we receive also be confidential. So all I can say is that we've been in touch with the Red Cross. But let me just say unequivocally, so that there's no lack of understanding about where the situation currently stands. All three of these courageous people have, since their institutional abductions more than a month ago, had no access to counsel and no access to family. And therefore, we are incredibly worried about their fate and what is happening to them. And even if the Red Cross were to have been given access to them, this would not fix the flagrant violations of due process relating to the fact that they have been disappeared and denied access to family or counsel. Some people, have said, well, they must be in Chipote prison. And I just want to emphasize that while it is possible they are in Chipote prison, the authorities have provided no confirmation of any kind, directly or indirectly, that in fact they are there. And so when Berta was talking about the families delivering food and medicine and water, it is in the hopes that perhaps they are there, and in the hopes that they will perhaps be able to receive these supplies to sustain them. But on no occasion during these visits to try to deliver food, water, and medicine has any prison official told them that in fact their loved ones are actually there. And so this is why they remain disappeared as a matter of international law.
Thank you, Jared. Para traducir su respuesta, sí es muy claramente un ejemplo de desapariciones forzadas. Cuando una persona es detenido por el Estado y el Estado niega a reconocer la detención o a proporcionar información sobre la persona detenida, significa un ejemplo de desapariciones forzadas. Y por eso en esos tres casos claramente son desapariciones forzadas. Desafortunadamente también la historia tiene una historia muy larga de desapariciones así, y por eso es muy grave la situación en que se encontramos. El gobierno nicaragüense ha indicado que los tres fueron traídos ante un juez que los condenó a 90 días en detención judicial. Para nosotros no existe una manera para confirmar si esta información es correcta. No sabemos si los tres fueron presentes en esta audiencia, sus abogados ni fueron informados de la audiencia. Pero también es importante reconocer la ley en que fueron detenidos es ilegal en el marco del derecho internacional. Nicaragua es un estado parte a los tratados del derecho internacional, como el Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos, y también la Convención Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, y bajo estas obligaciones legales vinculantes, esta ley es ilegal. Los tres no han sido cargados con algún delito, y su detención en marcha es una violación muy clara de la presunción de inocencia. Hemos tenido contacto con la Cruz Roja. No podemos comentar más que allá porque su proceso es confidencial. Pero los tres en sus casos, desde sus desapariciones, no han tenido acceso a sus abogados ni a sus familias, y por eso seguimos muy ocupados por su estado, por su bienestar. También varias personas han dicho o han asumido que los tres están detenidos en el Chipote. Es posible, pero las autoridades nicaragüenses no han confirmado directamente ni indirectamente que están allá. Como dijo Berta antes, las familias traen comida y agua al Chipote esperando que los tres están detenidos allá, pero no existe ni una confirmación afirmativa del gobierno y por eso no sabemos su paradero. Muchas gracias.
I saw the next question relates to the families commenting on this. Julio, do you perhaps want to say something or try to say something about your mother and her disappearance as a start? Because I think that they want to hear more than just from me as a lawyer.
I can read the question out loud, Jared, just for everyone in English and Spanish. Victor Manuel from Revista Intertextual in Costa Rica is asking for the relatives. Do you know what is the situation of those that are detained? Have you had any communication with any of them? Doña Berta called them disappeared. Can you speak a little bit more about that and why is that the case?
Muy buenas tardes, claro, a todos. Nosotros llamamos secuestro de desaparición porque no tiene ningún asidero legal, como han explicado en esta reunión. No tenían orden de juez. Las leyes que están aplicando, que es la 1055, no tienen ninguna base legal ni constitucional en las leyes de Nicaragua, y no tienen asidero legal porque simplemente son leyes que no se han creado para el beneficio del pueblo. Son leyes que se han creado de manera para beneficiar únicamente el entronamiento de la dictadura en el poder. Entonces, nosotros lo llamamos sinceramente secuestro. Hay que entender que así como mi madre, como Félix y como don Carlos y 130 personas que se encuentran secuestradas, es única y exclusivamente porque han luchado o porque han solicitado que queremos una Nicaragua en democracia, porque queremos una Nicaragua en donde nadie esté por encima de la ley y se respeten las leyes. Lamentablemente, como tenemos una dictadura, una familia que no le interesa absolutamente nada más que estar perpetuamente en el poder, es que ellos están en la cárcel. Nosotros lamentablemente hasta el día de hoy no sabemos nada de mi madre. Como hemos dicho, asumimos que está ahí porque ahí es donde llevan a la gente que es oposición al gobierno, y hasta el momento solo nos han dejado entrar medicinas, agua y algunas veces alimentos, pero lo que nosotros solicitamos, en el caso de mi familia, es que mi madre tiene 70 años, tiene problemas cardíacos y tiene problemas de salud. Queremos que un médico de cabecera de la familia la mire, queremos que mi hermano esté con ella, queremos saber cómo está. Parece es ridículo de que estemos en el 2021 y que la gente, porque está peleando por una Nicaragua en democracia, es la gente que esté presa. Y gente que está cometiendo actos de corrupción y violación de derechos humanos, andan en las calles sin ningún problema.
Muchas gracias, señor Julio. To translate into English, he has said there is absolutely no legal justification for this kidnapping. There was no arrest warrant presented. There's no legal foundation in Nicaraguan or international law. The laws in which the three and others were detained were only created to consolidate and maintain the power of the regime. And the only reason that the three who were detained, whose families are here, and the other 130 other political prisoners are held in Nicaragua is because they were advocating for democracy. For us, unfortunately, we do not have any information about any of the detainees. Sometimes the families are allowed to deliver some food, some water, periodically and consistently. But speaking individually about Julio's mother, Violeta Granera, she is 70 years old, has some medical problems. And for this reason, it's ridiculous that in the year 2021, just for simply advocating for freedom in Nicaragua, can you be detained in this way?
Berta, I think you wanted to add something.
Yes. También quería comentarles que en el caso de Félix ocurre lo mismo. No hemos tenido acceso para poderle ver, para poder hablar con él, ni su abogado, ni su familia. Ya son más de 15 días que no les reciben alimentos, solamente agua, y eso es que algunos días incluso los familiares no han podido acceder a las instalaciones del chipote. Hemos visto que en los últimos días han habido retenes policiales a la entrada del chipote. Los familiares que llegan son constantemente asediados en el sentido de que se les pide información personal de cada uno de ellos, sus teléfonos, fotografías de sus cédulas, incluso fotografías de sus rodamientos, de sus vehículos, de sus placas. También comentarles que en el caso particular de Félix, afortunadamente logramos que recibieran el medicamento que su médico había indicado, que su tratamiento de años, ¿verdad? Y al final también esto no quita nuestra ansiedad, porque igual, aunque hayamos llevado el medicamento, nadie nos asegura que él está tomando su medicamento, que se lo han dado como es. No sabemos el tipo de alimento que están ingiriendo, porque al no recibir el alimento de las familias, lo que asumimos nosotros es que ellos puedan estarle dando cualquier tipo de comida. Y en casos de algunos de los presos políticos, sus condiciones de salud requieren una alimentación y una dieta particular. Eso, por ejemplo, creemos pone en riesgo también la vida. Y quiero aprovechar también para mencionar lo siguiente. Si bien es cierto, hoy hemos convocado a esta conferencia para exponer la situación de nuestros esposos en el caso de Victoria y en el caso de Julio, doña Violeta, y hablar acerca de nuestra reacción y nuestra demanda de respuesta del Estado de Nicaragua ante la resolución de la Corte Interamericana, ¿verdad? También esta conferencia sigue siendo para hablar del resto de los presos políticos, de los 140 presos políticos que hay, de los cuales son 6 precandidatos presidenciales los que se encuentran desaparecidos porque tampoco conocemos ni el estado de cómo están, ni dónde están, y sus familias también se encuentran en la misma situación en la cual estamos nosotras. Y quiero agradecer también públicamente a todas las familias que estamos unidas en esta demanda de libertad de los presos políticos y de la población nicaragüense que también está secuestrada por la dictadura, que impide el respeto a sus derechos y la libre elección de sus autoridades conforme está establecido en nuestra Constitución. I don't know if I can rephrase.
No, gracias, Berta. Yo puedo traducir. Perdón, está escribiendo. Just Berta also wants to add that in the case of Felix, it's the very same situation. Since his disappearance, he's had no access to his family, to his lawyers, and for more than 15 days, his family members have not been able to deliver food or water to El Chipote, where it's believed that he's being held, although with no confirmation. The guards at El Chipote also take pictures of all those that tried to go there. They take pictures of their license plates as well, and other things like that. In the case of Felix, he also has medical problems. And while his family has delivered his medicine that was provided by his doctor, we have no confirmation that the guards are providing that medicine for him to take. For many of the detainees, they have health conditions that require particular diets, and we do not know what they're being fed or if they're appropriately being fed. For this reason, the families are demanding that Nicaragua respond within the framework of the provisional measures granted by the Inter-American Court, and for all of the other families as well that are suffering through this same process, for the more than 140 political prisoners being held in Nicaragua. The families are united in demanding the respect for the human rights of their loved ones and also for a peaceful transition to democracy in the country. Gracias, Berta.
Solo quisiera agregar una cosa, Jared. Después de lo que dijo Julio y lo que comentó Berta, yo quisiera decirles también que como nuestros seres queridos están desaparecidos hace más de un mes, lo que nosotros exigimos como familia es que los presenten. Y lo que queremos es prueba de vida de ellos, que se encuentran bien, porque después de un mes de no saber absolutamente nada de ellos, ya nuestra preocupación es cada vez más fuerte y lo que exigimos es que los presenten y que esté y prueba de vida.
And to translate into English, after what Julio and Berta have said, Vicky would like to add that our loved ones have been disappeared for 1 month at this point. What is most important to us is that the Nicaraguan government gives us proof of life and that they make them present. We want to see them. Our worry grows every day, and for that reason, we're focused on a proof of life, please.
Thanks so much. So we have a question from Associated Press, Gabriela Seltzer, asking what other legal actions are we taking in relation to the cases that we've been discussing today. I can say that our next steps from an international legal perspective will be both to lodge a further complaint with the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, to request a hearing, to compel Nicaragua to attend and to respond and explain why they have not immediately and unconditionally released Juan Sebastián and Félix and Violeta, as well as the other person who was the subject of the complaint. On Juan Sebastián and Félix's case, our next steps will be to submit a complaint to the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. This is a 5-member tribunal based in Geneva, created by the UN Human Rights Council, which adjudicates individual political prisoner cases. It's a litigation process where you make a complaint, where the government is given up to 90 days to respond. You're able to reply to any submission, and then ultimately the working group adopts a legal opinion, a detailed legal opinion, assessing whether or not a person's detention is arbitrary and in violation of international law. My experience with this body is very long and extensive. I've published actually the first ever book on the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which is a commentary and guide to practice 2 years ago now. And the book itself is about 650 pages with 6,000 footnotes, based on my having taken, at this point now, close to 50 cases to the working group. I'll note that I've never lost a case that I brought to the working group before, although I would emphasize that past success is no guarantee of future performance. But the reason why I believe I prevail is not necessarily because I'm an especially good lawyer, but because I only take up cases where I am convinced my clients are actually innocent of the charges against them or suspected potential charges. And because this is a very well qualified group of experts and they do their job with great skill, it is not surprising that when you are representing clients who are in fact innocent, that when you take a case alleging that they are being arbitrarily detained before such a tribunal, that you will tend to win those cases. So that process will take some time, as I just described. Is not the only thing we're going to be doing. I would just emphasize that, as you'll see in the coming weeks, we'll be engaging in a range of other political and public relations advocacy efforts to increase the pressure on President Ortega, not just to immediately and unconditionally release all of the 140 plus political prisoners, but also to, in the immediate term, reappear the more than 30 that have been disappeared, so that they can have access to family and counsel. And the bottom line is we will not give up until they are out, and until all of the prisoners are out, and until the Nicaraguan people are able to achieve their aspirations, which is to simply live in a free and democratic society where they've been able to elect their own leader, and where peace and tranquility and human rights are respected for all of the people of the country.
Thank you, Jared. Los próximos pasos de la perspectiva del derecho internacional, antes que nada, imaginamos que vamos a solicitar una audiencia de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos en que Nicaragua participará y para que puedan explicar por qué no han cumplido con las medidas provisionales otorgadas en la Corte. En los casos de Juan Sebastián, Chamorro y Félix Maradiaga, vamos a entregar un caso al Grupo de Trabajo de las Naciones Unidas sobre la detención arbitraria. Es un foro legal que recibe casos individuales sobre detenciones arbitrarias, y después de un proceso, el Grupo de Trabajo determinará si las personas son detenidas de una manera ilegalmente o no. Jared Genser tiene experiencia muy fuerte con el grupo de trabajo. También publicó un libro, un comentario y una guía práctica sobre el grupo de trabajo de detención arbitraria de la ONU. Ha tomado 50 casos al grupo de trabajo y han ganado todos los casos, pero solamente toman casos en que sus clientes son inocentes de los cargos en sus casos. Va a ser un proceso más largo, pero en lo interino vamos a hacer otras cosas, otros esfuerzos para exigir que el régimen de Ortega libere inmediatamente los presos políticos, pero también en lo interino proveen una prueba de vida. Es importante también enfatizar que no vamos a descansarnos hasta que el momento en que se liberen y para que puedan lograr sus aspiraciones para una sociedad libre y democrática.
So are there any last questions? We have about 10 minutes left of time. If you have any questions, please raise your hand or otherwise put a note into the chat box. One last call. Any last questions? Berta, you want to say something?
No, I think there was another question.
Okay.
Carlos Lario.
Oh, Carlos, do you have another question?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's in the chat, Jared. He's asking,
okay.
What are the next steps that can be taken at the international level? That was the same question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I think that there are a lot of ways that we will engage at the international level. I'm not going to explain them all publicly for obvious reasons. But let me just say that, we will be working in Europe. We've already, for example, as you can see in my Twitter feed, we met with a group of a dozen European parliamentarians, and a short time later, across 5 political parties, and a short time later, the European Parliament adopted its recent resolution that called for the release of the 3 courageous people that we're talking about today explicitly. And that came in short order after our meeting with a group of a dozen European parliamentarians. We also earlier this week met with the EU's human rights expert who was, very clear that he is going to keep a focus of the EU on the situation in Nicaragua and on the need to free the more than 140 political prisoners. We will be, of course, working with other major capitals in the region, Washington and far beyond, of course, and engaging in a wide array of activities designed to raise the profile of the political prisoners of Nicaragua and put enormous pressure on Ortega and his regime to relent and to let them out, and also engaging with the media widely to talk about what's happening and to make sure that the crisis in Nicaragua remains front of mind. I would say that from my perspective, the most powerful voices, of course, here are the voices of the family members whose loved ones have been disappeared, and Julio and Vicky and Berta are demonstrating great courage and grace and dignity in their fights to free their loved ones. And the more people that will hear them talking publicly, asking for help, imploring them for help, there are few to no people in the world that are not going to be moved by their call to action, because we are all, we all have parents. Many people in the world have kids, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, and what Ortega is doing defies all human decency, and the profound weakness that it demonstrates, of his regime is quite extraordinary. If he was beloved by the Nicaraguan people as he claims to be, if it's so clear that he's such a great president, then not only would he have no fear of an election, he would welcome every political opponent, let them travel freely, let them speak freely, let them advertise, let them meet the people, because the people in their infinite wisdom, when they were to hear about the accomplishments of the Ortega regime and comparing that to what the others are talking about they want to achieve, if there were, if Ortega was really so secure and so strong, he would win hands down in a landslide election, right? And so the only conclusion one can draw from, especially this last month, where more than 30 people, including 5 leading presidential candidates, have been disappeared, is that he is desperate. He is cornered, he is afraid, he knows he's lost the popular support of the Nicaraguan people. He knows that if he faced any of those 5, or even frankly anybody else, even somebody with no popular support to begin with, he would lose the election, right? And so I think that this is the message that one needs to take from what he is doing. Not that he is strong, not that he is courageous, not that he is a person, to be feared, but in fact, he's a person to be pitied, right? To be pitied, because a person who has to inflict such enormous pain on other people to make themselves feel good and to maintain their iron grip on power is a person who is small and weak and, insecure. And I think that pretty much defines where Ortega and his regime are at today. And I think ultimately the Nicaraguan people will make their voices heard one way or another. We've seen in the case of Violeta and Juan and Félix, 3 extraordinarily patriotic Nicaraguans who want nothing more than to leave their country better off than how they found it. And despite the danger that they knew full well, despite the extraordinary challenges that they faced, and speaking up and speaking out, all 3 of them said, I understand my very life can be at risk, but this is more important than just me. This is about our country, it is about our people, and it is about our future. And so it is such a tremendous honor for me as a human rights lawyer to stand in solidarity with such extraordinary human rights defenders. And I am very confident, having worked on more than 50 cases like this over my career, that we are on the right side of history, that by following the lead of Juan and Félix and Violeta and the more than 140 political prisoners, that Nicaragua will have a brighter future and a brighter day. It may not come tomorrow, it may not come next week or next month, but a person as weak as Ortega cannot hold on forever. In my experience, dictators are always afraid. They're afraid of a loss of power. They're afraid of justice and accountability. And these are all things that are coming for Ortega, whether he likes it or not. Unless there are any final questions, I don't believe we have anything in the chat box. Berta, Vicky, Julio, do you want to make any last comments before we conclude?
Jared, I will just translate quickly
Sure.
that last comment that you said,
Yeah.
and then open it up for final questions. Hay muchas cosas que podemos hacer al nivel internacional. También contacto con miembros del Parlamento Europeo acaban de adoptar una resolución muy fuerte. Hace como 2 días tuvimos una reunión la semana pasada con una docena de miembros del Parlamento Europeo. También tuvimos una reunión con el representante especial de la Unión Europea sobre Derechos Humanos, Eamon Gilmore, y fue una reunión excelente. Coordinaremos con Washington y con otros gobiernos en la región y también por el mundo para aumentar el perfil de los presos políticos en Nicaragua, y también seguiremos con comunicaciones con la prensa para que la situación siga alta en la agenda nacional, para que Ortega libere a todos los presos políticos en Nicaragua. Es obvio por la rueda de prensa de hoy que las voces de los familiares son muy fuertes, y cuando piden ayuda de la comunidad internacional, el mundo va a escuchar y también va a responder. Lo que hace Ortega en sus casos, absolutamente falta la decencia. Si Ortega fuera un presidente fuerte no detenería sus oponentes y ganaría en una elección justa, pero es obvio que está desesperado, ha perdido el apoyo popular y tiene miedo de perder su poder. Una persona que hace cosas así para mantener su poder es una persona pequeña, de verdad sin poder. Para el señor Jared Genser es un honor representar a los 3 detenidos de Félix Maradiaga, Juan Sebastián Chamorro y Violeta Granera. Obviamente son corajosos para entender que los riesgos de lo que se enfrentan son menor de las posibilidades del futuro. Y podemos decir sin duda que Nicaragua tendrá un futuro más brillante, sin duda. Thank you, Jared.
Vicky, Berta, Julio.
Agradecerles a los medios que nos acompañan hoy por escucharnos y por oír nuestras preocupaciones, saber de nuestro día a día y de nuestra desesperación por saber de nuestros familiares. También decirles que en el caso de Berta y mío, no vamos a descansar hasta que nuestros esposos no sean liberados. Muchas gracias.
Just to translate quickly, Victoria says, thank you all to the media for being present, for accompanying us today, for hearing our experiences. On behalf of her and Berta, we will not rest until our husbands are freed. Thank you.
Y respaldar lo que dice Victoria. Estamos convencidas que es nuestro derecho y que es nuestra responsabilidad abogar por nuestros esposos y luchar para que su liberación sea lo más pronto posible, y vamos a trabajar arduamente por ello. Y asimismo recordarles que aquí estamos juntos en todo esto, y cuando digo juntos, no solamente como familiares de presos políticos, sino también como nicaragüenses que queremos un país mejor, un futuro mejor, y que sientan que cada vez que nosotras tengamos la posibilidad de exponer lo que está pasando con nuestros esposos, también nosotras vamos a hablar en nombre del pueblo nicaragüense.
And Berta said, just to reiterate what Vicky said, we are committed to fighting for the return and reappearance of our husbands as soon as possible. And we are united not only as wives of political prisoners, but we are all united together as Nicaraguans who are fighting for a better and brighter future for our country.
Muchísimas gracias, Jared, por tus palabras, son muy acertadas. Efectivamente, que personas como Félix, como Sebastián, como mi madre, como más de 130 personas estén presas, estén secuestradas hoy, únicamente reflejan el deterioro de la dictadura en Nicaragua. Esto es el final de la dictadura. este dolor que estamos sintiendo cada uno de nosotros, y así como el dolor que han sufrido las madres de los asesinados durante la Revolución de Abril, es para decir nunca más a una dictadura, nunca más a una reelección. Creo que los nicaragüenses hemos lamentablemente aprendido la lección de esta manera, pero todo este dolor nosotros lo tenemos que transformar para una Nicaragua mejor. Les decimos con humildad, en mi caso que estoy fuera de Nicaragua porque fui también amenazado de muerte, que nosotros nunca los vamos a abandonar, que vamos a luchar por esa lucha que está haciendo Félix, por esa lucha que está haciendo Juan Sebastián, por esa lucha que está haciendo mi madre por tener una Nicaragua libre. Nunca más.
He says, thank you, Jared, for your very accurate words. It's clear that the situations of the three that are represented here today, Félix, Juan Sebastián, and Violeta, represent the deterioration of the situation in Nicaragua, that this is the end of the dictatorship. We will continue saying never again, never again. And while we may have had to leave Nicaragua physically out of safety, for death threats that we face, we will never abandon Nicaragua, never again.
Thank you so much for everyone who came today and for your ongoing interest. We'll be shortly sending out a copy of the remarks in Spanish and English, which you should already have from the chat box, as well as a link to the recording of this session as well. And you'll be hearing from us again undoubtedly very soon. Thank you for your important work to shine a spotlight on what is happening in Nicaragua, and with these three cases in particular. The greatest fear of any political prisoner is to be forgotten, and with your help, that will never happen. Thank you very much, everyone.